Right now, there's a chemical inside your blood that you never asked for. It was created by accident, perfected by DuPont, and sold as a miracle, but it will outlive you by thousands of years. For decades, they called it safe while secretly burying the evidence. They said it made life easier. What they didn't say is that it never goes away. Tonight you'll see how one invisible poison spread across the planet, and the question no one dares to ask: what else are they hiding? In 1938, inside a DuPont laboratory in New Jersey, a young chemist named Roy Plunkett opened a gas cylinder and expected it to hiss. Instead, silence. The gas had solidified into a strange white powder coating the walls, slippery, resistant to heat, impossible to break. He had just created PTFE, the molecule that would later be known as Teflon. At first, it was an accident no one cared about, but DuPont saw something no one else did. This was a substance that defied nature. It didn't burn, it didn't corrode, it didn't stick to anything. For a corporation, that meant only one thing: endless applications, endless profits. The world was at war, and the US military needed materials that could survive the impossible. PTFE coated valves in the Manhattan Project, shielding the systems that built the atomic bomb. A secret inside a bigger secret. After the war, the miracle chemical escaped the labs and entered homes. Non-stick pans, waterproof jackets, stain-proof carpets. Every ad sold it as clean, modern, safe. By the 1960s, Teflon wasn't just a product, it was a symbol of progress. Commercials showed perfect kitchens, mothers flipping eggs that slid like magic. Engineers called it revolutionary. DuPont called it the future. But nobody asked the only question that mattered. If nothing can break this molecule, where does it go when it escapes? The first warnings came as whispers. Farmers near DuPont's plant in Parkersburg watched cows die one by one, their organs blackened. Workers fell sick with strange symptoms doctors couldn't explain. The company labeled it coincidence, buried the reports, and doubled production. Profits silenced the alarms. And while you're watching this, hit the like button. This story is the kind of truth they'd rather keep buried, and every share makes it harder for them to hide. Behind the shiny commercials, DuPont was using another chemical to make Teflon: perfluorooctanoic acid, known only by its code name C8. It wasn't part of the final pan or carpet, it was part of the process. But C8 leaked into the air, into the water, into the bodies of anyone living nearby. It traveled silently, and no one could stop it. C8 had one terrifying property: it never leaves. Once inside a living being, it stays forever. Decades later, scientists would find it in rivers, in animals, even in polar bears, thousands of miles from any factory. But back then, almost no one outside DuPont even knew it existed. Why didn't they tell the public? Internal memos, later uncovered in lawsuits, show they already suspected it caused cancer and birth defects. They had data, they ran tests, they knew. But admitting it would have cost billions, so they kept quiet. And that silence allowed something far worse to spread: a chemical now inside almost every person on Earth. This is just the beginning, because what happened next reveals how far a corporation will go to protect a miracle, even when that miracle turns into poison. By the 1960s, Teflon was untouchable, the golden child of modern chemistry. It coated frying pans, spacecraft, and even medical devices. Every ad promised a cleaner, safer, better life. Families trusted it. Industries depended on it. DuPont's profits soared to the billions. The miracle was everywhere. But behind the glossy commercials, something darker was brewing. Farmers around DuPont plants were reporting dead cattle. Neighbors spoke of mysterious illnesses. Inside the factories, workers developed tumors, high cholesterol, and a strange condition that thickened their skin and disfigured their faces. They called it Teflon flu. DuPont's own scientists began warning exposure to C8 was dangerous. Tests on animals showed birth defects and organ damage. Internal documents revealed employees were instructed not to drink the local water near the plant. The company quietly relocated pregnant workers away from C8 production lines without ever explaining why. Still, DuPont told the world everything was fine. To regulators, they reported the data selectively. To the public, they said nothing. Why risk billions for the truth? During these years, C8 was already escaping far beyond the factory gates. Waste from production was dumped into rivers, buried in landfills, vented into the air. This wasn't an accident, it was a choice. And that choice allowed an invisible poison to travel into towns, into homes, into bodies. By the 1970s, internal blood tests confirmed the unthinkable. DuPont employees and their families carried traces of C8 in their blood. The chemical was already moving through human populations, and still no warning. Why didn't anyone stop them? Because the perfect product was too valuable to fail. It was in cookware, electronics, cars, even the suits astronauts wore to the moon. DuPont knew that admitting the danger would destroy decades of business, so they did what corporations do best when the truth becomes inconvenient. They buried it. Illuminate. If you want more investigations like this, the stories corporations hoped you'd never hear, subscribe now. The deeper we dig, the more they can't hide. In the years that followed, the evidence piled up. A confidential study found that children born to exposed mothers had eye defects. Another study linked C8 to cancer in lab animals. Every internal report raised the alarm higher, and every time DuPont's executives signed off on the same response: silence. They continued to sell the miracle. They continued to market it as safe. They continued to pour C8 into the environment, knowing it would never break down. The world believed in a product that was quietly contaminating it. People were cooking with it, wearing it, breathing it, and they had no idea they were part of an experiment with no end. Because C8 doesn't stay where it's made, it travels through air, water, soil, until it reaches everyone. You, me, entire ecosystems. And while DuPont counted profits, the chemical kept spreading, unstoppable. But even the most powerful cover-ups eventually crack, and when the truth began leaking out, it didn't just expose a dangerous product, it revealed just how far a corporation would go to protect itself. That's when the invisible leak became impossible to ignore. For decades, the poison moved in silence. C8 didn't need a spill or an accident to spread. It escaped unnoticed every single day, drifting from smokestacks, running off in factory wastewater, bleeding from buried drums into the soil. Invisible, odorless, unstoppable. Rain carried it into rivers. Rivers carried it into cities. The wind took it across borders, scattering it like a ghost across continents. By the 1980s, traces of C8 appeared in places where DuPont had never operated. Researchers found it frozen into the snow of the Arctic, in the blubber of seals, in the blood of polar bears thousands of miles from any plant. Whales carried it in their tissues, migratory birds in their eggs. The chemical didn't degrade, it didn't dissolve, it didn't disappear, it simply kept moving, climbing the food chain, entering every organism it touched. Scientists outside DuPont started asking questions. Independent labs in Europe and Japan confirmed what US regulators had missed or ignored. C8 was everywhere. It was in drinking water, in soil, in the blood of ordinary people who had never even heard the word Teflon. The shocking truth emerged. Exposure wasn't limited to workers. It was universal. Meanwhile, life around DuPont's Parkersburg plant turned into a slow-motion nightmare. Families drank water laced with the chemical for decades. They bathed their children in it, cooked with it, trusted it. Pets developed strange illnesses. Neighbors buried loved ones who had died too young. The company's own data confirmed what the community was living, but that data stayed locked in DuPont's files. Some refused to stay silent. Farmers like Wilbur Tennant filmed their dying cattle. Animals with twisted spines, blackened organs, and foam dripping from their mouths. The images were impossible to forget. Tennant begged for help, but DuPont dismissed him as a troublemaker. They blamed everything: bad feed, poor farming, even the farmer himself, anything but their chemical. Then, during lawsuits, the real evidence surfaced. Thousands of internal documents, hidden for years, came to light. They showed that DuPont had known C8 was toxic since at least the 1960s. They knew it built up in blood. They knew it caused tumors in animals. They knew it crossed the placenta into unborn children, and they chose to keep that knowledge secret. The cover-up was no longer a suspicion. It was spelled out in memos, reports, and emails. As the pressure grew, DuPont fought back hard. They hired lobbyists, they pressured regulators, they funded their own studies to cast doubt on independent science. Publicly, they insisted the chemical was safe. Privately, they prepared for lawsuits, quietly setting aside millions for settlements. They weren't protecting people, they were protecting themselves. The world was waking up to a reality no one wanted to face. This wasn't an isolated industrial accident. It was a permanent contamination. One molecule at a time, the chemical was building up in every living thing, from cows in West Virginia to newborn babies in Tokyo. By the 1990s, scientists confirmed what seemed impossible. More than 99% of humans on Earth carried C8 in their blood. There was no escape, no safe distance, no undoing what had been done. And then came the most terrifying question of all. If this chemical is already inside us, what is it doing to our bodies? The answer would shatter everything, in hospitals, in courtrooms, and in the lives of those who never had a choice. By the early 2000s, the walls finally began to crack. After decades of silence, DuPont faced a storm it could no longer contain. Lawsuits multiplied. Journalists dug through hidden archives. Scientists uncovered data that had been buried for years, and one by one, the pieces of the cover-up came into the light. Court documents revealed a timeline that was impossible to ignore. Since the 1960s, DuPont's own research had flagged C8 as a health hazard. They had evidence of organ damage in animals, cancer clusters in workers, and birth defects in children born to exposed mothers. They knew the chemical built up in human blood, where it stayed for decades, but instead of stopping production, they doubled it. In 2001, attorney Rob Bilott filed a lawsuit on behalf of farmers and residents of Parkersburg, West Virginia. The case forced DuPont to release more than 100,000 pages of internal files. Those documents painted a chilling picture. The company had known everything, and they had hidden everything. The evidence was undeniable. C8 was linked to kidney cancer, testicular cancer, thyroid disease, ulcerative colitis, high cholesterol, and pregnancy-induced hypertension. It was a list long enough to fill hospitals. Scientists formed a special panel to investigate, and their findings confirmed what DuPont had feared all along. The chemical was making people sick, and not just in Parkersburg. The settlements that followed were historic, but they were only money. The damage could not be undone. Even after paying hundreds of millions, DuPont never admitted full responsibility. They spun off part of the company, rebranded, and quietly continued business with new chemicals, replacements that scientists now suspect may be just as toxic. Regulators around the world began banning PFOA, the compound known as C8. But banning it on paper didn't remove it from the planet. The molecule had already done its work. It was in the rivers. It was in the soil. It was in the blood of nearly every living human, and it will stay there for generations. That's why scientists call it a forever chemical. It doesn't break down. It doesn't leave. It simply waits. Inside us, inside animals, inside the earth itself. Every new study uncovers more traces, more effects, more reasons to fear what's already inside. And here's the final twist. Even as the world banned C8, new versions took its place. Compounds like Gen X were introduced as safer alternatives, but early evidence suggests they may carry the same risks, the same persistence, the same invisible threat. The cover-up may have ended, but the danger never did. It's in the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat. It's a legacy that can't be reversed. Think about it. One accidental discovery in 1938 created a chain of events that poisoned an entire planet. The corporation responsible buried the truth for decades, trading public safety for profit. And now, no matter where you live, no matter who you are, you carry their decision inside you. So the question isn't whether DuPont covered this up. They did. The question is, how many other chemicals are out there, waiting to be discovered, waiting to be revealed long after it's too late to stop them? Today, the truth is out. The chemical DuPont tried to hide is in rivers, in soil, in animals, and in you. Scientists call it a forever chemical because it doesn't break down, not in the environment, not in our bodies, not in time. One decision, buried under decades of lies, changed the world in ways we still don't fully understand. And this was just one cover-up that surfaced. How many others are still hidden, waiting to be exposed? The system that allowed this to happen is still in place. The players have changed, but the game remains the same. If you want these stories to keep coming to light, hit the like button, subscribe to Bull Secrets, and join the investigation, because the more people know, the harder it is for them to hide. The molecule they created will outlive us all, but the truth can and still does spread faster.